My name is Mark Durno. I'm going to be talking about agri-food and specifically the opportunities in that industry. But just to check that it's relevant for everyone here today, how many in the audience eat food? Yeah, I see a couple of hands. Could you make some noise? It's really bright lights. If you eat food, please make some noise. Yes, food. Good. Okay. Excellent. So I'm going to take you on a whistle-top tour of some of the opportunities that we see at Rockstar Agri-Food within the agri-food industry, the food supply system, and how we look at investing into agri-tech and food tech startups in that space to help companies go from early stage through to the growth stage. But before I look forwards, I think it's always good to look back and get everybody on a par as to where we are today and how we got there in terms of innovation and food productivity. So I'm going to use a quick case study. This is our home farm in Scotland. We produce on 350 hectares of production in Scotland, doing barley, wheat, and oilseed rape. And that farm's been in our family for a long time, so I can use a few data points that I'm comfortable with to demonstrate to you what the drivers of innovation in the food supply system have been until today. In the turn of the century, at 1900, our farm was employing around about 50 people. And we were producing about 35 different products on the farm, using 7 horses for the heavy lifting and the heavy work in the fields. Throughout the course of the last 100 years, we've seen a few agricultural revolutions, the first of which was the hybrid corn revolution in the 20s. That's when our neighbors in the United States came up with novel ways to produce more using hybrid types of corn. Then we had the mechanical revolution in the 40s when tractors started replacing horses. And then we had the fertilizer revolution in the 40s, 50s, 60s, through to the 70s, where we had to spray a lot of nitrates to feed all those hungry hybrids. The point is, when we fast forward to today, on our farm, we are currently hiring 1.5 people. We produce, instead of 35 products, we're producing 3 products, being barley, wheat, and oilseed rape. And instead of 7 horses, we have several thousand horsepower through the machinery, robotics, and automation that we use on the farm. The big drivers for those innovations and the changes that we've made have been 2 things: reduction of cost and increase of efficiency. And that's what I hope to show you today, is that those drivers for innovation are changing in the future. We've got a few big global trends that we need to take consideration of when we're looking at the opportunities to drive innovation in food supply systems. So first of all, you're probably sick of hearing the statistics that we're going to be almost 10 billion people by 2050. Anyone in the room did not know that? Okay, good. Unless you're putting your hand up, in which case I can't see you anyway. Secondly, land availability. Agricultural land is under pressure because cities are growing, and we're starting to use rainforests for food production. And lastly, climate change and carbon footprint. I don't know how many of you know this, but the agri-sector and the food sector as a whole use 70% of the world's energy. So we're a huge contributor to the carbon footprint overall. That creates a few big pains in the coming 30 years. Firstly, all those people, how are we going to feed them when the food demand is going up to by 56%? Secondly, land availability. We need twice the size of India in order to cater for all of those people in terms of the amount of food we have to produce in the coming 30 years. And lastly, we're already using 70% of all the world's energy for food production, distribution, and consumption. Well, that's going to go up by 40% too. So it sounds a little bit pessimistic. These are big pains that we're facing, and I hate to tell you this, but this forecast also takes account of productivity gains that we've had over the last 100 years as well. So if you continue to have that good productivity gains, we're still going to end up in the same place, which is 56% more food needed, twice the size of India in terms of agricultural land required, and 40% more energy required. The good news is that we see this as an opportunity. Many other startups and investors also see this as an opportunity to fill the land gap, the food gap, and the greenhouse gas gap. So when we're looking at an investment thesis about what we see in the coming trends for the next 30 years, it's ultimately how we close these gaps and stay on track in terms of our climate goals that we're using as the basis for our investment thesis. And it's also what we see within the industry that many startups are taking advantage of. Some of you might think this is a bit fluffy. This is a bit like, it's sustainability and, we're okay here in Slovenia. We've got like 50% forest, so still got a little bit of land that we can use for production. Well, anybody who needs data, there is a report behind this. It's from the World Resource Institute, which was commissioned by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Bank, and other impressive names. And there's some data, but the point of a presentation is not to show you graphs, it's to do less, right? It's just to try and get you inspired. So I won't bore you with the data facts, but you can look them up. So how do we take advantage of these gaps? Well, the World Resource Institute has kindly set this out in a framework for us so that we can actually see 5 courses of action across 22 items of opportunity. So if you're an entrepreneur in the room looking for inspiration, hopefully I can bring some today off the back of these gaps. The first one, World Resource Institute course number 1, in order to hit these gaps, is reduce growth in demand for food and other agricultural products. So that means that you guys have to just eat less. Does that sound reasonable to everybody? Some people are saying yes. Personally, I'm not going to eat any less. I'm pretty skinny as it is. So I need all the calories I can get. And I hate to say it, but while it's good news, emerging markets like China and India have got also an exploding middle class who also expect to eat well like their European counterparts. So this sounds counterintuitive, but actually there are some simple examples of how we can do that. And one of them is reduction of food loss and food waste. I've got some examples of startups on the screen just now, and also a multinational, who are seeing food loss and food waste as a big business opportunity. This is you have to consider that this is 1/3 of all of the production of food in the world that we either produce, distribute, or consume is either lost or wasted. So if you can unlock that value, it's a massive opportunity. I won't give all the examples because I'm going to give you 15 different startups as examples today on a top level, but a couple of highlighted ones. Firstly, Rockstar work with market partners in order to try and activate this kind of impact and change for startups and to improve our food supply system. And one of those market partners is Maersk. Maersk have 40% of all the world's shipping and logistics. They're the largest player when it comes to shipping. And that means that they also did some numbers and they realized that they're also shipping 30% of all of the food around the world. So the chances are, if you've got imported food in your kitchen, 1/3 of it came through a Maersk container. They see the business sense in trying to unlock the value of food loss and food waste because of the fact that they're so exposed across the food supply chain. So we teamed up with them last year, and they're working with startups in order to invest in those companies and actually drive change within the food supply system as a business opportunity for Maersk. So this is not just a startup focus that we take a view on. There are multinational companies who are actually addressing these issues. Another example, and I'll just keep it to one on this page because you may have seen Too Good To Go before. If you haven't, really cool Danish startup who are linking up consumers and chefs who have got meals that would otherwise go into the waste. So if they've got excess, they basically, you go on the platform, you link it up, and you can buy a meal for €1.50. So it's just-in-time saving. Inspira Farms, this is a company who are dealing with first-mile logistics. So Too Good To Go are doing the last part, which many of you as consumers experience on a day-to-day basis. What you don't see is that in the first mile of logistics, when you come to emerging markets, for example, we're actually losing 45% of all of the food that we're producing. And that's due to simple things like not having a cold chain in place. So Inspira Farms have an off-grid cooling solution that can be at the point of harvest or at the warehousing point for growers in emerging markets. And from that, they can actually increase productivity to market by a factor of 45%. World Resource Institute Course 2. I'm not sure how many of you noticed, but we're talking about courses and menus. I mean, this is a very deliberate pun from the industry, so apologies from that. But World Course 2 is basically looking at how do we increase food production without expanding agricultural land. So again, this sounds counterintuitive. How is it that we can have more food being produced on the land that we already have? And it requires a certain type of innovative thinking to think about how to increase productivity in a way that doesn't negatively impact the climate. A few of the startups that we're working with here, for example, Protix. Insect protein is a really big topic right now. Many of you have probably tried a nice tempura cricket before. Anybody make a noise if you've tried crickets? Yeah, I heard a woo, so somebody likes them. Protix are not making insects for human consumption. They're dealing with the massive B2B market. So protein, if you have steak or pork or indeed even chicken to some extent, or fish, they need protein. And that protein typically comes from soy, which requires a lot of land to produce. So Protix are using black soldier fly larvae as the core source of protein for aquaculture. And that's on a factory basis. It means that they can take the black soldier fly larvae, which is about 75 kilograms at the start of the week, and turn it into 100 tons of protein at the end of the week. So there's a massive opportunity for scale there. Likewise, with Perfect Day, that's the milk that you see spilled on the screen here. This is animal-free dairy products. So Perfect Day are using dairy yeast, water, and plant proteins mixed with some vitamins in order to produce milk. And you can churn this milk, turn it into butter, you can make cheese from it, you can do yogurts with it. It has all the same properties as milk. You're going to get your calcium from this product, but they use 3% of the water that you would normally require and a fraction of the land, because you don't need to have all those hectares and hectares of farmland for dairy cows to graze on. You just have one factory. And then lastly, last example on the page for any digital startups out there would be Mothhive. They're using IoT to bring insights on data to strawberry farmers in order that they can do predictive analysis of when to pick. It sounds super simple, but our agricultural industry here is not linked up in terms of how to use data as information. So by bringing actionable insights, Mothhive have been able to increase yield by 20% for the farmer. So the last example I'll give in terms of the courses is course 5, Reduce Greenhouse Gas Emissions from Agricultural Production. Easy. Well, not really, because we're using like 70% of the world's energy to produce all of this food. But there are some startups coming up with smart solutions in order to improve or optimize processes and practices, which in turn reduces the size of the gap. So there's less gap to meet. Telesense. This is a North American startup who are using Bluetooth technology with sensors to track humidity and temperature of grain. So barley in North America, they waste and lose about 700 billion tons of production every year because the farmer doesn't know that the grain is going bad in the store. I know this personally. On our farm, the technique is to go into the store, stick your hand in the grain whilst you're having a cup of coffee in the morning, and go, feels a little bit warm, we'll put the blowers on. Or you're really busy and you say, I'm sure it's fine. So they bring actionable insights. So by optimizing the process of analysis, you can actually reduce the amount of waste, and thereby you've got less greenhouse gas emissions because you produce less food. WeFarm is another great example. Really simple. They're bringing sophisticated European production techniques and insights to farmers in emerging markets. And they've got a community now of several thousand farmers who are using these actionable insights to improve their yield and have a better return on their production. So the point is, there are huge opportunities here. Agri-food is the biggest industry on the planet, and it's going to have the biggest impact on your day-to-day life in the future, and future generations, if we're going to be able to feed everybody sustainably and resiliently. We've seen a huge influx of new capital and investment coming into the space in the last few years, but it's still a drop in the ocean of what is required in order for us to make the real difference that is required to close these gaps, the food gap, the land gap, and the greenhouse gas gap. We've also seen a maturation in the market. Insect, which is another insect protein startup out of France, they raised a round of 125 million euros at Series C last year, which is pretty unheard of in the industry. Antillic, this is livestock, digital tech. They sold for 2.4 billion euros last year. But that's nothing compared to Beyond Meat. Anybody heard of Beyond Meat? You see some hands? Yeah, make noise. Yeah. So Beyond Meat is, there's alternative protein burger. This is a plant-based burger, and it should give you all of the same experience you have as if you were having a beef burger, so you just cut out the cow. They just IPO'd at 30 times the forecast valuation on $3.5 billion. Actually, it should be euros, just a few weeks ago. So this is activated. The industry is being taken seriously, and the opportunities that are out there are enormous for startups. However, there are some core challenges that you face as an agri-tech or a food tech startup in order to make your company have the impact that you want it to have and scale in the way that you want it to scale. And that's where Rockstar try to lend a hand and help by providing the right kind of access that you require, smart access within the industry, I might add, to bring you from that early stage company to becoming a growth stage company that can make a real difference. We offer access to capital through investment and follow-on investment up to Series B. We offer access to community through events and various dinners that we run in order to bring the community together for support. Access to expertise through a mentor network of industry-specific mentors. So one of the things that we see are tech entrepreneurs who have got fantastic technology, really good technical skills, but don't really understand the industry, require some guidance. So we help with that. And importantly, access to market through market partners like Maersk, as I mentioned at the start of the presentation. Because the point is, if you are a startup, this is irrespective of agri-tech or food tech, but in the context of this presentation, if you're an agri-tech startup or a food tech startup, there are plenty of places you can go for incubation. You can get free grants and support for your idea. And there are also plenty of places you can go for big money when you're at growth stage and you've de-risked your company. But in between there, the gap from when you've got your minimum viable product and you've got your first proof of concept trial in the market through to the point where you're ready to scale the organization is really difficult because there's not that many players out there who are willing to take a risk. And that's basically where Rockstart provides the support. And that's where we want to try and make the impact against the food gap, the land gap, and the greenhouse gas gap. We do it in a structured way through an accelerator program and then continuing to co-invest up to Series B. Through the accelerator, we're focusing very much on business building and on company structuring, getting you ready for growth. And we do it in a very practical way in terms of ecosystem activation. So you need to be close to the core of the industry, and in terms of both technical expertise and export and taking innovation from R&D through to commercial scaling, the best places to be in Europe are Denmark and the Netherlands. Maybe Slovenia will be there too one day, but right now they're number 1 and number 2 respectively in most of these fields. So we based the program out of Copenhagen and we based the fund out of the Netherlands in order that we can bring different parts of this community and industry together to cohesively tackle those big opportunities or challenges, whichever way you want to look at them, going forwards. So that's what we look at. How do we optimize processes and practices? How do we reduce food loss and food waste? And how do we make the food that we're producing and distributing traceable and actionable for the consumer? Because you need to think about your own health and what it is that you're consuming at the end of the day. So the big bold statement is that we invest in great startups driving positive change in the food supply system. And the inspirational part of this here is that it's at the beginning of the crisis right now. We're in it. The challenges ahead of us are already happening. So if you have an idea, or if you're inspired to try and close the food gap, the land gap, or the greenhouse gas gap, then I would really encourage you to move forward with that. Talk to us if you want some support and guidance on where to go with it, and have some positive impact on the food supply system. I also cheekily just put a a little advertisement on the last slide here to say that applications are open until the weekend for Rockstar Agri-Food. So feel free to apply. I have got time. I wanted to save time for a couple of questions because I think it's always nice to hear from you guys as well if you've got specific questions or if you want to challenge me on any of the things I've said. So, anybody?
And that's...
No?
That's usually the part where I take over.
Oh, apologies.
Don't worry. I'm happy that you're making me redundant, don't worry. That's technology and so on. Speaking of which, we are using something called Slido, and these are the most popular questions. Where in the food value chain do you see the toughest problems and how to solve them?
So, if we're thinking about food gap, so we need to produce more food, and we're considering the land gap and the fact that we technically need more land to produce all of that food, one of the biggest problems is how do we unlock the value in emerging markets of food production at a fair price for the farmer? We're losing 45% at the field, and there's just not the infrastructure there for those farmers to be able to produce, pick, and deliver the food to where it needs to get to. So that's a global issue. We can pretty much solve the food gap and the land gap if we can just optimize those processes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Can multiple small permaculture farms replace our agricultural system?
No.
Good. Next question. Which criteria should a startup fulfill to be accepted in the Rockstart Accelerator program? Bet you didn't see that one coming.
Okay. So we look for startups who have got a minimum viable product and a first customer. It should be that you're ready to take your product or your business to the market and start scaling it, and you would be looking at raising a significant round within the next 12 months that we would help you with.
Whom do you see as the main players in the food tech ecosystem?
That's an interesting one, because normally you would consider the big multinationals, Nestle, Unilever, these ones. They definitely play a huge role. But in terms of effecting change, you really need to have a cohesive collaboration between startups who have got interesting technologies or new business models, investors like ourselves who are really looking to try and help those companies get to where they need to be, and then the collaborative and partners from the market who can help activate the businesses. And sometimes that's adjacent industry players like Maersk. We also work with IKEA. So you have to consider holistically the collaboration across all those different fields.
1 second left. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, my friend. Pleasure meeting you.
Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much.